Thanks for coming. Thanks for making the time to come down. My name is James Franco with the Kansas Policy Institute. And we're releasing the results of a poll that we just completed last week with SurveyUSA. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to fire them out once we kind of get through maybe some initial remarks. And then with that, I'll introduce Dave Trobert, the president of Kansas Policy Institute.
Thanks, James. Morning, everybody. We did a market research a couple of years ago in 2010 because at that point we were hearing a tremendous difference between what citizens were telling us when we went out and spoke one-on-one or in front of groups as compared to what some other polls were showing. And what we found then was that people's basic understanding of the facts had a tremendous difference on what they thought should be done. For example, that was back in 2010 when there was a proposal to raise the state sales tax to give more money to schools. Well, most surveys were saying, yes, people were very willing to do it. We went out first and found out how much schools were, what they thought schools were getting, and how they thought that it changed, and found that, for example, the people who thought that school spending was down compared to 5 years ago were slightly willing to pay a higher tax, but people who thought spending was up compared to 5 years ago were very unwilling to pay. So we wanted to see, we've heard some more of those differences over the last couple of years, and we thought we'd want to go out and test that again. So we've formed a partnership with SurveyUSA, which is a nationwide polling firm, and they also do work for KWCH here in Wichita and KSHB in Kansas City. This is not associated with those. It's just to say that frankly, it was one of the reasons we picked SurveyUSA, because media has already, in both markets, have already found that their results are reportable and reliable. And I'd also worked with SurveyUSA in the past in my media career, and I had nothing but good things to say about them. So the survey we're going to show you today really confirms what we found in our first survey, and that's maybe the number one takeaway here, is that if people don't have an accurate understanding of the underlying facts, they'll give you dramatically different opinions on what should be done. Here's a first example here. We're looking at, you can see this is on per pupil funding for the state of Kansas. We asked people, how much do you think the average school district receives from state taxpayers? The number one response was less than $4,000. The accurate answer, of which only 13% knew the correct answer, is that it's more than $6,000. It's actually almost $7,000. It's $6,983 last year per pupil. You want to go to the next one here. We asked, now what about total spending from all taxpayers, state, local, and federal tax dollars? And again, the plurality, the majority of people thought it was less than $6,000. The reality is that it was $12,656 per pupil last year. We also did one looking at how much it had changed. How much do you think per pupil funding in total has changed over the last 5 years? And most people thought it was down more than 10%. Only 15% knew the correct answer, that it's actually on a per pupil basis up 9.5%. So when you understand this and then you start looking at what people think should be done, you find dramatically different results. And I don't have a chart for this, but I just wanted, we asked the hypothetical question, would you personally be willing to pay higher taxes if school funding had done this? The people who were least informed, the people who thought that total funding was down more than 10%, 64% of them said yes, they'd be willing to pay higher taxes. But the next least informed, people who thought it was about the same, said 46%. And then if it was up less than 5%, 38%. And then when you got to the most informed people that knew that it was up more than or about 10%, only 31% were willing to pay higher taxes. So this kind of theme repeats itself throughout the last survey and the one we've just done here, showing that when people understand the facts, they give you a completely different result. The next one I want to show you here is And this one comes from, oh, by the way, I wanted to mention some of the regional differences. Ironically, the people here in the Wichita area, which was Sedgwick, Sedgwick, Butler, and Reno County, I think, were the least informed statewide. I mean, head and shoulders least informed on the amount from the state. Only 9% had the correct answer versus an average of 13%. Western Kansas, by the way, is the most informed. Western Kansas, and I'm not sure why this is, but it was head and shoulders. Western Kansas, 29% knew what it was on the state funding per pupil, 22% on total funding per pupil, and 28% on how it had changed. The Wichita area, in almost every case, was the least informed. In one case, only 2%. Another question we asked about was administrative consolidation. I want to emphasize this is not about that dreaded C word. It's not about consolidating school districts. But when we were talking with folks, again, around the state in conversation at the state task force a couple of weeks ago, some of these things come up, and we've found that people are very interested in finding ways to get more money into the classroom. So one of the questions we asked, we told them that the spending per pupil outside the classroom on things like transportation, administration, food service, building maintenance, it's not capital and debt, but all those other current operating expenses ranged from $2,000 per pupil to almost $13,000 per pupil across the state last year. So we asked, well, in order to get more money into the classroom, do you think school districts should go across district lines and combine some of these out-of-classroom functions? And as you see, 65% are strongly or somewhat in favor of that. That's an overwhelming number. Only 28% were somewhat or strongly opposed to that. That's huge. It's not surprising to me because this is kind of what we've heard as we've gone out and talked. But when you talk about this from a policy standpoint, elected officials are often quick to say, well, the public they're not interested in that. Well, they really are. And it's also interesting that it's broad support across the state, anywhere from 52% in western Kansas to 70% in eastern Kansas. Here in the Wichita area, that should say area, not metro, that's my mistake, it's 63%. This was all across the state. Very broad support for rethinking how we do things. How do we get more money into the classroom without just charging taxpayers more money or cutting services, spending on other services? The next thing I wanted to mention here is shifting over a little bit here to state spending. If you just ask, what do you think should happen to state spending, and people don't know what's taken place, you'll get a different result. Here we told people that state spending was actually up about $1.5 billion since 2005. It's up 31%. And that, in fact, according to the National Association of State Budget Officers, 31 states spent less per resident than Kansas last year. And that number has been growing. So we asked then, what do you think should happen to state spending? 43%, a plurality, think state spending should be reduced. Others, 28%, think hold it the same, 20% increase it, and 9% weren't sure. So getting people the facts and letting them make an informed opinion has a tremendous input on or action on their belief. We also asked, and there's no chart for this, but do you think state spending the state could operate maybe 5% to 10% more efficiently? And that was an overwhelming 83% response. And it didn't vary across the state. 83% of Kansans believe that state government could operate 5 to 10% more efficiently. Even government employees. We did a separation for asked, are you a government employee? 82% of government employees in the survey believe that state government could operate 5 to 10% more efficiently. This is critical because we specifically asked 5 to 10% because our dynamic analysis of the tax reform bill showed that only an 8.5% one-time reduction in state spending is necessary to fully implement the tax reform bill. It's not about cutting services or eliminating essential services. It's about making all those services a little bit more affordable, like 31 other states across the country have already done. So people clearly believe that that can happen. The last thing we talked about was property taxes. Everybody's perhaps most hated tax, not only in Kansas, but kind of across the country. No surprise, 69% of Kansans think that property taxes are too high. Only, I think, 3% thought they were too low. I don't know who those 3% are, but we might like to meet them. So then we ask, well, why do you think it's up? And property taxes since 1997 statewide are up 99%. That's the collections, actual tax dollars. It's much more on residential. Residential collections are up 149% since 1997. So we asked people, why do you think that is? And we gave them these options. The number one, head and shoulders, overspending and inefficient spending. Now, we asked, well, what about unfunded mandates? Because that's what we've heard government say. It's up because we have all these other, at least taxpayers don't believe that. Only 11%, or 14% rather, believe that spending went up because of unfunded mandates. 12% thought it's because services are better. 11% thought it was other circumstances beyond government's control, and then 12% just weren't sure. But there's no question here that people believe it's because of overspending and inefficient spending. And when you look at the facts, and this wasn't part of the survey, this is just looking at the state or the city of Wichita financial statement. Between 2002 and 2009, property tax collections went up 49%. In the county, it went up 51%. Now, that's over a period while inflation was up 17%, 3 times the rate of inflation. So it's no wonder, and certainly no surprise to us, that people would say they think it's because of inefficient spending. So the last question we asked was, of the people who thought the taxes were too high, what do you think we should do? And, I didn't do one for that, but I can tell you what they thought it should be done. The majority said the answer is to eliminate, or not the majority, but the plurality, 36% said the answer was to eliminate non-essential services. Now, what is considered a non-essential service is subjective. The point is, they thought that there are non-essential services that could be eliminated. 21% rather say provide the same service at a lower cost. So again, this kind of supports what we found that people say why they believe taxes are as high as they are. Because you put those together, you got 57% are saying the way to get property taxes down is to eliminate non-essential services, whatever they may be, and to bring down the cost of all services. Only 5% said that the state should raise taxes in order to give more money to local governments and have that be considered property tax relief. There was 22% thought that the state should reduce some of the state spending and give money to local districts, or to local governments. So the conclusion that we get from all this is that there's a lot more education that needs to take place. I mean, that's with media, that's with school districts, with legislators, and frankly with Kansas Policy Institute. We have to do, all of us, a lot better job of helping taxpayers understand what the facts are. And it's not about pointing fingers, but it's pretty clear that people's opinions about what we should do, how we should resolve some of the biggest challenges facing us at the local level and the state level, it all comes down to how well you understand the facts. And we can't just rely on a simplistic question, just ask a single question, what do you think should happen? Should spending go up or down? Should taxes go up or down? It clearly depends on how well informed you are. So this is, I'll just stop here and be happy to take any questions you have, because I know Deb has a hard stop.
Hey, I was going to ask you, Dave, on these per pupil funding statements, are those the dollar amount that you have that says this answer is correct? Is that, where did that figure?
The Kansas Department of Education.
Okay, so it's not, because I know there's been some contention between Policy Institute and...
Yeah, well, I don't know if you'd call it a point of contention. They only focus on one piece of state funding. They don't like to talk about the total amount that state taxpayers provide. I mean, first of all, it all comes from taxpayers. It really doesn't matter who writes that last check. It's all coming from taxpayers, whether it's coming through local property taxes or state income taxes. Yeah, the contention is that we talk, and this I think underscores the importance of giving people all the facts. We talk about the total amount that districts receive, according to the Department of Education. Now, obviously, you can see the results here where it's no coincidence, I think, that the largest response is that 39% think it's less than 6,000 or less than 4,000. I think it was 44% thought it was less than 4,000. What taxpayers are feeding back is what they've been told. They've not been given all the facts. They've only been given a piece of the information.
And now I'm going to go to that consolidation.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about that, you're not talking about school districts.
No.
Consolidating, but you're talking about activities. Give me
Administrative. Well, for example, you'll have Sumner County has 7 school districts and only, I think, 3 or maybe 4,000 students. So you have 7 payroll systems, you have 7 transportation systems, you have 7 food service systems, and so forth. In fact, there's out of the 105 counties, only 77 counties have fewer than 1,000 districts or students per district. We have a lot of very, very small districts. So when we've gone out and talked to people who naturally are concerned about how do we get more money into the classroom, because at the same time they don't want to pay more taxes, they're overtaxed, they think, already. Well, we have to rethink the culture. We have to think, how do we do things differently? And when we've asked people, well, what do you think about this? It's like, well, fine, we don't care about that. You know, if it's going to get more money into the classroom, I mean, you think about it. Look at any fast food, like how many Pizza Huts are there in Kansas, in Wichita? They each don't have their own payroll system. They each don't, each one doesn't have its own kind of entire corporate structure. So what you're talking about is leave all the attendance centers where they are, but why have all this duplicated effort? I'll give you a great example because we did this when I was back working in Ohio. And we did a comparison where there was one county in Ohio that had 21 school districts, about the same number of students, like 34,000 students. One county had 21 districts, 600 square miles. The county across the river, where there was only one district per county, had 900 square miles, but one school district. The one school district moved those same number of kids around with 150 buses. With 21 districts, it took 272 buses to move those same kids around. And so we put reporters just like you on those buses and said, okay, how long are they on the buses? No longer. The kids were happy. They just use logistics. It's like when here in Wichita, when 259 found a year or two ago that by changing the start time of a few schools by 10 minutes, they saved $2 million on transportation. It's logistics. It's figuring out how can we make better use of the resources we have. And so that's taxpayers, what this says is taxpayers are very open to saying, well, let's have one place that let's coordinate transportation out of one district. Maybe this district does food service. The coordination, you still need to have it all, the kids get the service, but you don't have to have multiple administrations coordinating all that. You don't have to have excess capacity in buses. Buses are expensive. And then you can look at things even broader. We didn't put this in the survey, but you could have one purchasing system for multiple counties. And instead of, if you go through school district checkbooks, it's amazing how many tiny little expenditures you find. What it means, because they're all little retail purchases. It's $12 at OfficeMax and $15 at Walmart. We're paying top dollar retail prices for things that could be bought at tremendous discounts if there was centralized purchasing for all the basic supplies that every school uses. So taxpayers are very open to rethinking these dynamics and changing that culture. You still have local control about how kids get educated and what teachers get employed, but all the other stuff, all that extra cost, bring that down and find ways to get more money into the classroom.
You mentioned Ohio. Are there any other states that have tried this?
Oh, well, Ohio is one that's more like Kansas. It is all chopped up. There's a number of, not only are there several states that have always had, for them, they only have one district per county. But even there, they'll do a lot of those more like buying co-ops. But even in Kansas, we already have over 20 counties where just by happenstance, we only have one district assigned to a county. And again, we're not talking about that nasty old C word. But we already have, in a lot of counties in Kansas, one payroll system or one transportation system. It certainly can work. And so rather than have 4 or 5 or 7 across counties, it's not like you have to do it all together, but this is something that taxpayers are very willing and think that school districts should do a lot more of.
And as far as educating people, did you find out why people aren't educated, or are they not reading? Are we not doing a good job of getting?
No, we didn't ask why, but I think the answer is all of us are not doing a good enough job of giving people all the facts. I mean, these are not easy things. They're somewhat complicated. But something as simple as, I mean, the data from all the facts that we get on school spending or state spending or anything all comes from government. It's all there. And in fact, we've made it easier with our Kansas Open Gov website. So there's one easy place to go find it. It's all consolidated. All we've done is pull all their data together. So you can see the facts on how much, whether it's the average per pupil from state taxpayers into a district or into an individual district. The data is all there. It's just that taxpayers haven't been given, whether because we just haven't worked hard enough or in some cases because we might not want them to see all the facts. I mean, it's pretty clear. I mean, when you get answers back that mirror what a lot of school districts have said, this is all we get in base state aid, well, of course, people are going to report that back. They're not being given all the facts. Bob?
Regarding the level of knowledge about school spending, I think I remember in your 2010 survey, you found that parents who had children in public schools were actually less informed about the level of school spending.
That's right.
Than the general public. Do you have questions regarding that on this survey?
No, we didn't ask that specific breakout, do you have kids in school, because only a portion of the survey was dealing with school funding. But yeah, that's exactly what we found, that people who you would think would be the most informed were actually the least informed then, which again seemed to indicate that people are going to report back what they've been told. Certainly some people said, I don't know. But those who thought they knew were based on what they'd been told. Yes?
How do the results of the recent survey compare to the survey that you did in 2010?
Great question. We did find that there has been some very good movement. People are, while they're still not very well informed, they are more informed than they were 2 years ago. Thanks, Deb. I know. Thanks. Good seeing you. Thanks, Larry. Good seeing you again. They are more informed. When we asked 2 years ago how much aid per dollars do schools get from the state, I think it was 6% had the correct answer. This time it was 13%. So we've made some progress, but we still have a long, long way to go. But it's critical that we do that, because when you understand how people's attitudes and decisions change as they become more knowledgeable, it tells us that that's what we have to do. And frankly, that's a lot of what we do at Kansas Policy Institute. It's kind of what we kind of jokingly say, it's what Paul Harvey would say, telling you the rest of the story. Because these are the facts that, oh, now I know that, I've got a different answer. I think we should do something differently.